What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be going over the topic of how to break through a fat loss stall, and I'm going to be going over a couple different scenarios. I know this is pretty basic information for anyone that's watching the channel that is more experienced, but without a doubt this is the number one issue that people come to me with when they're coming for coaching or just messaging me in DMs looking for advice. It's always a situation of, I've been dieting, I've made all this progress, but now I can't get the scale to move any further. What am I supposed to do? So that's what I'm going to be going over today. Before I get into the different scenarios and what I would do in those scenarios, I'm going to go over why this occurs, why you were making so much progress and all of a sudden now you can't push any further. Why this occurs is because your metabolism is a sliding scale that's going to be dictated by your thyroid's output. Your thyroid's output is going to be influenced by what you're putting into your body, primarily food. That being said, the more food that you eat, the more that your thyroid's output is going to upregulate. And then on the other hand, the less food that you eat, the more your thyroid output is going to downregulate. And why this occurs is essentially as a survival mechanism. The less energy that you're inputting to your body, aka the food, the less your body is going to output as a means of preserving the energy for your bodily functions. This is exactly why you can't just indefinitely continue to lose fat on a static amount of calories, and you need to continue to reduce them in order to continue the fat loss. Now, eventually, you're going to run into a wall where you're eating, let's say, an arbitrary number of 1,600 calories per day. You're a 6'2" male, 220 pounds, and eating 1,600 calories, you cannot continue to lose fat loss. So what do you do in this situation? Scenario number one is going to be someone who is in striking distance of the goal. Let's say 5 to 10 pounds away. They have a timeline set. Let's say they have 4 weeks to get there. And their food is very low. Their cardio is high. They're taking a fair amount of drugs. What am I going to do here? This is going to be one of the occasions where I actually think it's appropriate to push the envelope with drugs. Obviously, if there's still room to dig away at the diet to push more cardio, I'm going to use that as well. But assuming that this person is not using a dangerous amount of drugs and there is room to increase them and not necessarily throw the kitchen sink at it, but if there's ever a time to abuse drugs, this is going to be the exact scenario. So this is where you could use things like caffeine, ephedrine, yohimbine, clenbuterol, some mitochondrial peptides like MOTS-C and SLU. If you're already using them, again, as long as you're not using dangerous doses, this would be a time to push the envelope and use some higher doses. This would also be a good time to use thyroid replacement meds, specifically T3 in this scenario because of how acutely it can take effect. Seeing as your thyroid is downregulated, this would be a great time to quickly upregulate it with some pharmacology. This would also be a great opportunity to use refeeds if the timeline allows for it. A refeed could be a day, 2 days, 3 days, up to a week, depending on if the timeline allows for it and how quickly you need to achieve this goal. Refeeds are a great way to use food to upregulate your thyroid. It'll also restore glycogen. It's going to improve your gym performance, which is indirectly going to boost your metabolic rate. Unfortunately, it's impossible to give any specific direction on how to refeed and how much food to eat because it's not black and white, and it's going to be heavily dependent on how lean is the person, how muscular are they. This is where having a coach is very important and can be very beneficial. Otherwise, there's just going to be a little bit of trial and error. Eat X amount of food. I would err on the side of eating less food. See how your body responds the next day. You don't want to refeed and be up 5 pounds in one day. 1 or 2 pounds is appropriate. In some situations, people even drop weight after a refeed. So just monitor the scale, monitor your body composition. Again, this is where having a second set of eyes can be very beneficial. That leads into scenario number two, which is going to be an individual who has been dieting for a long time. In most cases, they had a lot of weight to lose, and they've already made significant progress. Let's say they've lost 50 plus pounds, but now they still have another 50 to lose, but they're eating very little food, and they can't get the scale to move any further. What are we going to do in this situation? In order to get you back on track, it's not an extremely complicated process, but it does require time and patience, as well as a fair amount of micromanagement and attention to detail. So what you're going to need to do is essentially take one step back to take 2 steps forward. And for someone that's unfamiliar with the process, this is probably going to sound completely ass backwards, but it's what's referred to as a diet break or a reverse diet. The whole idea is to build your metabolism back up and set you up to continue another fat loss phase. Unlike the previous scenario, I'm going to advise against using drugs to break through this plateau. It's very short sighted. It will move the needle a little bit for a couple weeks, maybe, but you're not going to make the notable improvements in fat loss that you're looking for. If you have 20, 25, 30 pounds of fat to lose, using drugs as a single variable is just never going to work. Now, what is a diet break or a reverse diet, and how should you approach it? There's a ton of videos on YouTube already about this, and I've seen most of them. And although the information is generally on track, they don't really give a clear explanation on how you should approach it. The most common thing I hear is people saying, you've been dieting for a long time, your food is very low, your metabolism has crashed, you need to return to your maintenance calories for X amount of time. The problem with that advice is, like I mentioned in the intro of the video, your metabolism is a sliding scale. So if you're currently eating 2,000 calories and the scale isn't moving, that is your new maintenance. So how does that advice make any sense? So I'm going to try to give a more clear approach on how you should approach a reverse diet to build your metabolism back up and set you up for further fat loss. The main objective of this phase is to increase your food intake, which is going to increase your metabolic rate. Meanwhile, we want to maintain a similar body weight and body composition. It's not uncommon for people who have been in what I call like a metabolic hole to actually see some sort of like a recomp effect during this phase where they've been in a hole and spinning their tires for so long, the introduction of food is going to ramp up their metabolism. They're going to actually experience more fat loss and overall a shift in body composition throughout this whole process. Moving on to how to successfully execute a reverse diet and restore your metabolism. It can be pretty nuanced, but for the most part, the approach is fairly standard and is going to work for most people. You're going to want to start off by increasing your food intake in very small increments. When I say small increments, I'm talking about 100 to 200 calories on average. And you're going to want to do this, let's say, every 5 to 7 days. This is where it's going to require a fair amount of micromanagement, attention to detail, and you're going to want to use your scale as your main tool to determine should you add food, how much food should you add, and how often should you add food. Like I mentioned earlier, one of the main objectives here is to maintain a similar body weight and similar body composition throughout this process. That being said, it is not abnormal for you to gain, let's say, 3 to 5 pounds throughout this process. That's going to be water retention, mineral retention, glycogen retention, all these things. They're going to drive the scale up a little bit. What you don't want to see is a 5-pound jump on the scale after a single increase in food. That's going to be a good sign that you added in too much food too quickly. So how you're going to want to approach this is add in a small increment of food, let's say 100 calories, monitor your scale weight for, let's say, 3, 4, 5 days. If the scale hasn't went up, add a little more food. If the scale is going up, wait for it to stabilize, monitor it for a few more days after that, and then increase your food again. It can be a slow, tedious process, but this is the only way to increase your metabolic rate and your food intake without gaining fat in the process. Now it's just a matter of rinse and repeat. Increase your food in small increments week after week until you're in a spot where your metabolism's in a good place, you're eating a good amount of food, and you're ready to start a new fat loss phase. Now, you don't want to do this for 2 or 3 weeks and only increase your food by 500 calories because that doesn't give you enough runway to push for more fat loss. If you start there, you're going to be in the exact same hole within 3 or 4 weeks. So ideally, as high as you can get your food, the better. You don't want to push it so high where now you're noticing you're getting fat because that's where you're pushing it too far. To throw some ballpark numbers out there, let's say you're someone who was eating 2,000 calories per day and your fat loss is stalled. As a coach, I would like to get you back up to 3,500 to 4,000 calories per day as your new maintenance level of calories. And also during this time, this is a great time to start tapering back some cardio if you were doing a bunch. If you're using a lot of drugs, you can pull back the doses or remove them entirely. Essentially think of this as a reset period where you're getting everything back to a baseline and you're giving yourself all these new levers to pull when it's time to get back to fat loss. That's all I have for today. If you're someone who's pushing for fat loss and you've hit a sticking point, I hope this information was enough to get you back on track and moving in the right direction. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Please please leave comments. I love all the interaction. If you have any questions or need clarification about anything that I spoke about in this video, leave it in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Also, if you're interested in coaching from me, I always leave my Instagram link in the description. That's the best place to reach out to me for that. We could set up some sort of consultation, whether you want to do it over text, if you want to set up a call, video call, whatever. I'm open to whatever. Feel free to reach out for that. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.